So we have here with us today Shirley and Nisa. Both of them are kind of amazing people from the data world, both with very interesting work in terms of design. And I think that the main idea is for everyone that have never seen their work, if there is someone here that have never seen, to first of all, to see it. And for those that already know, to the fan club, feel free to use the chat to send questions. We have some questions here, but we're happy to onboard the questions from the participants. So for both of you, Shirley and Nisa, I think that let's start simple, talking a little bit about the work of you both. So if you could tell us, and let's start with Nisa, what is your favorite work that you have ever done?
Hi everyone, good afternoon, or boa tarde para alguns, good evening for others, boa noite para outros. Isto vai ser uma mistura, eu vou falar em inglês, mas eu sou portuguesa, original de Portugal. But Rachel, to your question, one of my favorite jobs or works that I have done was when I started really data visualization. I do have an example. I will show you and I will explain why it's my favorite work. Not because it is amazing in design, but it is the story behind it. So can you see my screen at this point?
Yeah.
So this piece of work, it's about the Mount Everest and people that summit or attempt the summit in Mount Everest. As I said, I was starting in data visualization at that time, and I started watching a movie, which is The Everest. I don't know if you guys have watched that. That was based in real facts on an event that happened on the 10th of May, 96, where an expedition was caught when they summit, and unfortunately they perish in the mountain. But that movie, what showed me was there was so much I didn't know about that subject. And that's why this is my favorite, because I think from all the visualizations, this one was the one that I really had to go deep and research all the points of the visualization and the story itself. So on the movie, what we learn is the different types of journeys you can do to the summits. And then there is that empathy, that personal part of the movie, which is what makes people want to summit. But the other part, which is quite dark, is how many people lose their lives attempting something that normally we see that as a trophy in a shelf. So during the movie, and I don't want to be too dark, but what I had learned was after the 8,000 meters, there is an area where you cannot stay too long, which is a part of the summits. And you just have a really short window to stay there. There is the part that you die the most, because of course your body, you shouldn't be human life at that altitudes, but also after you summit, when you come down, you still perish because you fall. There is a lot of avalanches and all of that. To get this data, I used one of the databases, which is the Himalayan database. And I had to go through journals to see the name of people, how did they had died, at which altitude they died, and what was the cause of death. And that's why I said I learned so much, because this was at that time a manual work. I had to go to different sources. I had to double check with the database if it was really correct, given the facts. So what I did was I told the story by, first of all, what people wanted to do, which is the summits. And you can see from the first, from 1953 until 2014. And I divided that by country, where people were from, the number of summits. So this is something interactive where you can see through the years how many people summit. where you see where they are from and who submitted, of course. And it has the data about who was the first person that summits, who was the first woman, who had the most number of summits, and so on. On the other side, I then did a visualization about the people that perish, which is the people behind the numbers. And this is the part where it's raising awareness about people that stay in the Mount Everest, because not all the bodies are recovered. And it was that touched me the most. So I decided to show that it isn't just numbers. Every little data point is a person, and that person potentially is still there. So I used the charts to make the ascending parts where they stayed, and then when they were descending. And when you go down, I ended up saying what were the main causes of death, and then the effects of altitude and the amount of oxygen you have as you summit. So in a very long nutshell, this is why this is my favorite work. Not in design, but in story and what I learned from it more than anything.
And I guess that a data collection also, especially the data, the thing to put together a database that doesn't exist, it's always a lot of learning and a lot of researching to make it happen, right?
Precisely. That is, I think, when you start something like that, where we have a lot of manual work and you have a lot of research, you start creating that sentiment to your work that you want even to know even more, and you go deeper and deeper, and you want really to see who was that person, why did they went, why that happened, how they are, the family. So all of that has a lot of emotion, and yeah, it was amazing to do, a sad subject, but really, yeah, really great to look into this subject.
It is a great one, and especially the part of bringing stories to the data, right? I think that we have a lot of people here that come from either work as a journalist or a designer in the newsroom, where this is quite important, right? It's like it's not just a number; it's more than a number that you have. It's a story that you have behind it. And thanks for sharing, Nisa. And Shirley, for you, what is your favorite, your baby, your favorite work that you have ever worked in?
Oh, yeah. So I actually was thinking about this and I was like, I actually have two, if that's okay. But before I share them, I actually wanted to say I love and resonate so much with what you were saying, Nisa, about trying to show the people behind each data point, and kind of paying respect to the fact that, and I love that we're talking about like storytelling with data in this panel, because like I resonate really very much about really paying respect to what each of those data points represent, and then also the emotions. I really resonate with like what you were saying about not only did you feel the emotions and like making to create that story, but that's what you were hoping to like communicate across. And I think that when I was thinking about my favorite, and I couldn't narrow it down, I think that's something that I felt very similar about, is like the ones that I like the most is like, not only did I enjoy making them, but it was kind of like it was sort of like there was an emotional element to it, which is kind of something I really love about what we do, that like oftentimes people think data is like so cold and rational, but rather that like there is some really beautiful stories or emotional stories in there. So let me just share screen. Okay, so this is one of my favorites. I was like, maybe I shouldn't mention this one because it's so old. But I chose the two I did because one was at the very beginning of my freelancing, and then the other one is like the most recent big project I did. So this was at the beginning of when I decided to go full-time, independent, and get into data visualization as a freelancer. And it is called an interactive visualization of every line in Hamilton. And so as I scroll, these kind of dots dance around, and each of these dots actually represent, um, Hamilton the musical. It's like a worldwide thing, right? Like this is I don't gotta explain anything about I like just launched right into it. But yeah, so as I scroll, each of the dots represent a set of lyrics sung by a character. And then as I keep scrolling, I kind of present some of the analysis I did and some of the things I learned. And then I present another set of kind of like stories I found from the analyses. And at the very end, I share the visual tool that I use to do my analysis, where you can filter by any set of characters, conversations, and themes, and then dig into any of the remaining songs. And the reason why this is one of my favorites is because this was done in 2016 when I was just obsessed with Hamilton the musical. Like I just was listening to the cast recording day in, day out on drives, like just like nonstop. Hey, nonstop. Um, and my husband was like, "Why don't you just do a visualization around it?" And I was like, "No, that's too much. That's too obsessive." And a few days later, I was like, "Okay, I got to do it." And it really was like one of those like one of my I think it is one of my like all-time big personal projects that really was very much kind of like what Nisa was saying, like it very much was driven by personal curiosity because the source material is just like so rich and like, you know, references across the musical, and there's like little and so there was it just was like really rich. And then I think my favorite part about working on this, aside from kind of like all of the technical challenges that were fun, trying to figure out what the design should be to like communicate across what I was finding, I think it really was that I got to know the musical at an even deeper level. So, one of the things I mentioned is that when I first started listening to the cast recording, I really didn't care that much for Eliza, who is Hamilton's wife, because she just seemed so shy. I kind of write this. She seemed so shy and reserved and really overshadowed by her sister. But as I kind of really started to dig into recurring phrases and like overarching themes and how the whole musical ends, I realized like that she was the one with the most character growth throughout the musical, and that her story was like, to me, the most beautiful of all. And that's kind of what the story part of this visualization is about, kind of like getting that across, like getting that feeling of, oh my God, Eliza is such a beautiful character. And I think that this project did quite well. And I think that the reason why it resonated with so many Hamilton fans is precisely because of that emotion of when I was digging through and analyzing the data, I felt really like overwhelmed by how beautiful her story was. And I think I was able to communicate that. And I think a lot of people resonated with kind of how this story about Eliza made them feel. So that's the first project. And then the second one I wanted to share is kind of, I wanted to share it because it to me in my head, it's kind of like the opposite end of the Hamilton visualization. Because whereas like Hamilton visualization is like a very linear narrative and a relatively simple story, this one called People of the Pandemic, I created this in April of last year. And it's one of my favorites because I think it was one of the times when I took a different approach to data. I wouldn't even say data visualization. I might say like data communication, maybe, of like what I was trying to do with the project. In that I think this was at the very beginning of the pandemic. And one of the frustrations I kept on feeling was like how many people weren't taking it very seriously because they were like, oh, like, you know, it's not going to affect me. So then I wanted to use data to communicate, like, it might not, I wanted to use data, but also put the person into kind of the center of the data and try and see if I could create empathy by making them the center of the data story. So how it goes is basically each person that enters is quote unquote, the approach I did was a game format. And each person that gets to this website can either enter in their zip code. Unfortunately, the data is all US based, so the zip code is US based, or choose a community size. So I can say urban. And then once I start playing, what's happening is kind of this, I don't know what to call this view, but like it has these kind of like, game metrics at the top. There's these dots whizzing about, going from their quote unquote homes into the town center and then back. And then what's happening is, as the people are quote unquote going about their day normally, there is a pandemic spreading, and then there's kind of these stats at the bottom. And then this is kind of the main part of it, which is we actually pull not only actual population data from that zip code, but also we kind of extrapolated around how many hospital beds each zip code had. So then at the end of 1 week, the quote unquote game mechanic is that someone can choose how many times they might go out for food and how many times they might go for exercise. And then they can see what the rest of their quote unquote team in this game did. And each of these people is actually, each of these other people on the team is actually a person, an actual real life person that played this game before. So the kind of overall goal of this project was to show that like, we as individuals, like our own kind of effect on the spread of a pandemic might be really small, but that it's actually about how we as a community decide to act. And yeah, and then there's some of these kind of things that are going up at the bottom. Yeah, so this is the other one I wanted to share. Ooh, this one has much more hospital beds. But yeah, so this is one of my other favorites because it was a challenge to myself of trying to see if I can communicate data and trying to communicate what we wanted in a different way from the linear narrative that I have been working on a lot. And also my favorite because it was the first time I had a personal project where I was working with a small team of people. So I also kind of like quote unquote project managed and project led this. So it was a lot of firsts working on this project. Yeah. So that is this project. And then at the very end, you can like choose to see if you want to let the community go back to business as usual. And then this like line graph down here, that's the infected cases by day, just like shoots up in a really scary way. So yeah, and there was I did this with Stephen Osterman, who is he did all of the simulations, and he's a like master's in public health, really amazing. There's like a really intense kind of simulation and methodology behind this. So another thing that I was really proud of how much we tried to make sure that what we were doing was as accurate as we could get it. Yeah.
Quite nice one. And I think that especially with all those things around COVID, this one is a very, very different way to work with the topic and with data. And I will take the opportunity to just, because I think that it's so unusual, that it is a good one to ask about process. So usually, how do you work with data, and how did you do this one? Because I can imagine that the process to create this one, because in the end it was a bit of a game. It's still kind of using real world data, so it needs to be realistic. It needs to be kind of accurate. So how do you usually work with data, and how was in this case specifically? So do you have a kind of a process that you always use it that you could reuse, or it was kind of totally different from the other ones?
Yeah, so my usual process is for personal projects, at least. I'll come up with something like I'll usually there's some sort of curiosity I have, about the world, and usually like that becomes a few different questions, and I might go out um and try and collect data. This like manual data gathering is both so fun and so frustrating. But then once I have the data, I'll try to explore it as much as I can. I'll go in with questions and I'll try to explore visually, usually with like some simple charts, see if I can kind of draw some answers for those questions. And once I have some set of answers that I think are quite interesting, I'll start trying to think about designs around those answers that usually I'm trying to communicate to a reader. And then after the design, it's usually code. I'm a software engineer by training. And so I code for the web. And so I use like D3 and Vue and Greenstock, and then finally publish. So that's my usual process. But just like you said, this one was a little bit quite different. It was less a curiosity and more frustration. And I was trying really hard not to be like propaganda-y. I was trying really not to be like preachy, but it was like hey, it's a big deal, please, like, please pay attention. And so that's kind of like, there was a message I wanted to tell from the very beginning. But then at the same time, I think this is maybe something we can talk about also later if you're interested, but I feel really strongly about being very careful with data, or like being very intentional with data. And so when Stephen and I started partnering up about this project, one of the biggest questions we kept on asking ourselves is like, are we doing more harm than good by trying to do this project? Like there was, I mean, in March, there was just so many like visualizations popping up about COVID because there was so much data, and then there was so much freely available like charting software. And so it was just, and some of them were really great and very great explainers, and some of them were extremely misleading and sometimes just alarming. So we kept on asking ourselves, like, is this something we should be doing? And because of that, we were very, very careful with the way that we decided to choose, like where we decided to get data and where we decided to kind of quote unquote make up data for the simulation. So we decided to get real world data about non-COVID information. So the populations and hospital beds, those were readily available government data. But when it came to actual COVID data, we knew that the data was moving, like the numbers were moving so fast, like that R naught number was moving so fast, like infection rates were moving so fast that like we knew we didn't want to rely, and also like case numbers were very unreliable. And so because of all of that, we knew that we didn't want to use actual COVID data. And that's why we're so careful in all of our messaging to be like, we're not trying to simulate the pandemic. Like we can't predict the future. That's not what we're trying to do. We're just trying to simulate what a virus or of that R naught number could spread in a community of your size. And so we were really careful about that messaging. And so all of the numbers behind the simulations, Stephen kind of crafted himself. And you can read about that in the methodology. But he got them as close to the are kind of like the that are not number as he could. So that was probably the biggest difference in the process of usually I would start with a curiosity. This time around, it was more like an intention and a message I wanted to communicate. Usually I would rely on data for everything. And this time there was a part of the data that we just knew we couldn't rely on. And so we tried to be really, really clear about that in all of our messaging. Yeah.
It's a different, it's slightly different, but yeah, I think that you kept the process in a way. And I'd like to ask Nisa also, because I don't know, sure, but it seems that you do something like some data analysis and then some design and then some code, and maybe go back to everything when things fail. And
yeah,
Nisa, in your case, do you identify a process when you're working and with data? Because then you're more in the business side of the things also. So the type of asks sometimes are a bit different. How do you organize it? Is it a similar process, a different one for you?
Yeah, it's for personal projects, as Shirley said, it's different, right? Because normally, as she said, is a curiosity or you want to raise awareness about something. And I think on the second example that Shirley just showed us, one of the things that we noticed very carefully was how the message was transmitted or was communicated, which wasn't, oh, we have a pandemic, alert, everyone, just close the doors, nobody out. But you have to be careful also, you are responsible. There is that ethical component to anything that you do. And I think you were spot on that visualization, Shirley. I really love it. But the process is, as Shirley said, so it starts with a question. Sometimes it starts by reading a magazine, or even, as I said, for the Everest one, you're watching a movie and you suddenly think, oh, I could visualize about that. And it will be interesting to see not only the point that I found that highlighted the importance of the subject, but then thinking about what will be the next question. And once you have those questions, you start many times on paper, not on software itself, not on code, sometimes just sketching and thinking, how will I tell this story? What will be good to have to highlight what I want to highlight? Then you go and you grab the data, or you try to find that data. There's a lot of research about it. Then you come to the data and you start investigating the data to see really if you have the data points that will allow you to do the story that you want to do. And at that point, you may need to adjust. So it's what you said, it's not linear, it's not start here, finish there, and you know that you go from A to B in a straight line. It's not, there's a lot of curves, and you will reach to the point that you wish to convey the message. Sometimes, and I think on all the process, the only constant that I have is I finish the project, I leave 1-2 days if I have that opportunity to leave that time. I step away from it. And then after a while, I come back, because then it brings a fresh pair of eyes. You come away of that work that you are so passionate and you are working around it. So you need that space to really see what potentially other people will see, and showing to others that don't understand much about data, and tell them, how do you understand this? Because your understanding is different from them. Of course, on business side, you are much more restricted because you have clear requests, but still, you still have that freedom of having those conversations for what the stage of requirements gathering. So that's a conversation of going back and forwards, and your process of visualization will also change. So it's similar with some differences. Of course, you have much more freedom on your private projects, but yeah, both processes are very convoluted, but you reach to the point that you don't really want to reach.
Oh, perfect. And I will go back to the curves in a minute, because I like the analogy. I will just stop for a while because there is a question here. If any of you would like to take a question that is in the chat, could somebody define data-driven narrative in a single sentence. So if any of you would like to try single sentence, please, to define data-driven narrative. I will not try. I'm just asking.
I potentially wouldn't say data-driven. I would prefer to say information-driven.
Ooh.
Because it's more the information that you want to convey than the data point itself. So I would say, yeah, it's an information-driven process. And that will include text, it will include visual aids, and it may even include videos, anything that will convey the information in the best form. I told a lot of sentences, but
it wasn't single, but it's still a paragraph, I think. It's not that best.
I like that a lot. I don't think I have a good answer because I feel like that's a very, a question that's very, it feels very specific to journalism because I feel like that's where I hear a lot about data-driven narratives. And so I can offer the perspective as someone that has worked with journalists before, not to write, but to support in the visualizations. And I guess I can just say, like, for me, so this is not like a industry-wide definition, but like for me, a data-driven narrative is something where and I guess maybe that makes my definition a little bit different from what Nisa just gave. But for me, I think it's trying to communicate when it's data driven. I imagine a really large data set, or even data sets that's like, a few hundred points or a few thousand points, something that would be hard to put into a paragraph. This is not going to be a single sentence. This is going to be many sentences. Something that's hard to put into just a few sentences, but something that or even something that like we couldn't have known without having analyzed that data. But because we have that data set and we were able to analyze it, then we're able to succinctly portray it in a visual form that maybe would have been a lot harder to explain in a few sentences. And so that whole process to me is maybe not necessarily data-driven narrative, but in my mind, it's like data-driven journalism. And I think, and then I see kind of like, but in my head, I always think of the visualizations as something that needs to support the story, to like kind of like maybe it makes the story better, but never to overshadow the story. So that's how I think about it. But actually, while Nisa and I'm sorry.
It can be Rachel, don't worry.
No. I want to try and remember how
the Portuguese one, Raquel.
Raquel, thank you. So when Nisa and Raquel was saying about process, I just wanted to share this really quick. This is how my process usually goes for any project. So just wanted to, I really resonate.
Yeah, no, I think that it's a good illustration of the process, especially mental process. And if you could just, can you share it back, Shirley? Because my question, the next one is about, because I'd like to go back, because we talk a lot about data, and especially when we're talking about design, we focus a lot in the design process, and then we forget that data, when you're representing data visually, we're still needing to do this little thing called data analysis. Data analysis can be extremely frustrating for several reasons. Like sometimes you think, oh, I have here this amazing question. It's the best question in the world. And then you go there and then you try to find data and then there is no data. Or you find the data, but then you try to answer the question that you had and you discover that there is no answer for the question in the data. you discover that it's missing things or whatever. So I'd like to talk a bit about this part, the specific part of data analysis, and maybe frustrations that come together. And how do you organize the part of analyzing data? And if you have ever had something like a very, very traumatic moment analyzing data before
all the
showing
time.
the beauty of it to the world, right? Because when we see those projects, they're all shining and wonderful. And I think that we ignored that before it. We had some steps that were not as beautiful as the visuals in the end. So any of you both who would like to start with the frustrations, feel free.
I have plenty, but I guess okay. So I think there is some very specific examples I can give. So I think when I first started out with data visualization, one of the biggest mistakes I made was getting too excited about the design without having first explored the data. And oftentimes what I used to do would be like, I would collect the data because that part is important. But I would skip that, like you said, I would skip that second part and I would go straight to design. And then I would get really excited about this like design idea I have, and I'll like draw it all out. And then only to put in the data and be like, oh, it looks really bad. And sometimes I'll like actually spend like waste a day or two trying to implement the design I had, only to find that like the data doesn't make sense in it. And that's kind of, I think that is probably over the years, the biggest lesson I learned about how important that data analysis part is in making sure that my third step is as a kind of smooth as possible. I just realized that the example I wanted to show, okay, so this is one of the examples, which is where I got the data and then I went and sketched out something that was like really rough, but there was the idea where the project, the data I had was I collected colors from like thousands of photos I took. And the idea I had was like, I was like, oh, I will place all of these dots where on the x-axis, it will be by like day, time of day that I took the photos. And then by the y-axis, it will be like when I took the photos, or maybe like the x-axis will be, you know, which continent I took the photos. And I was like, brilliant, this is going to be great. I'm going to get a great visualization out of this. So this is, I like showing this at conferences. I titled this piece of art, Man Peeing into Puddle. And this was my first lesson where I was like, oh, I need to explore the data. And then I actually did go back and explore the data and eventually came up with something that looked passable. But that was one of the ones where it left a really deep impression. There's another one that I wanted to share, but it seems like I don't have the write-up for it up. The write-up is in our books. But for this project, what happened for this one is I did not have a good process for data analysis. And the way that I explored the data is I would draw out a design and then I would implement it with D3 from scratch, take a day or two, then be like, oh, that didn't work out. And then I would repeat. And it took me like a month and a half to land on something really good. And in the short story of this is it's part of a project called Data Sketches, where we used to have all of the process write-ups online like this, but now we have it in a book. And so half of the projects, the write-ups are not online anymore and they're only in the book. And I really wanted to share the process for that project because there's like 7 different designs that I went through and implemented before I landed on the final one. But yeah, so that is to say, many frustrations of the data not working out until I realized how important this number 2 was. And then since then, I've kind of figured out a flow that really works. And that for me is observable with Vega Lite to really quickly explore the data. And yeah, so that is kind of.
Oh, and it's good to hear that you have the same issue. I'm feeling better now.
Many times, so many frustrations. Yeah. Sorry I took over so long with the frustrations.
No, don't worry. I think that it's good. It's good to hear that other people have exactly the same problem. Nisa, would you like to share also your frustrations and then make everyone feel even better before we end?
Yeah, I think frustrations with data is an acquired concept already. As soon as you come into the field of data visualization, you will have that as part of the analysis. Because if you start with how you want to drive the story and with the questions, and you imagine that you will have all this data that will fit straight on what you are thinking, and then you go to the data and you start trying to create, and you see that, or you have missing data, or there isn't standardizations, or the mapping is completely wrong, and you have to start taking outliers. But I think it's the process that we all go through, and is what makes us get a little bit more mature and learn as we go. Because for sure, when I started, same thing, Shirley. I will imagine these amazing visualizations and it will be so good. And then I will look at the data and it was one point in 2010 and another one in 2014 and nothing in the middle. And you're like, okay, so I cannot do this. So let's go to the data set. And this is where that part of analysis. And these days we have even user-friendly tools that allow you to just drag and drop very quickly, see how the data is, if it is skewed, if it isn't skewed, if you have outliers, if there are some trends that you may think, there is some kind of seasonality here that I need to explore. And then from there, you don't need to do pretty charts in the beginning. It's really just explore, see what the data gives you, see what it matches to the story that you wanted, and then go back. So that are the parts of the curves that Shirley has there. So yeah, but as you get, I don't want to say older, let's call it mature. As you mature, you will start learning in that process. Yeah, more experience, and things get easier. Doesn't mean that you will never be frustrated again, because you will.
But you know that it will happen, I think. You start to anticipate your frustration a bit better. And you don't do this amazing sketch with the thinking that the data will fit in your imagination. I think that's the most important thing.
I think you learn also to detach to that. So when you start, and I talk by experience, when I started in visualization, you get attached to the idea and you wanted to do that idea. And then you get more frustrated because the data doesn't correspond to what you were thinking. But as you get more experience, you learn also to detach yourself of your expectations. You are your best friend, you are your worst enemy in data visualization. Because you guys know, if you work with data visualization, a pixel can be so annoying as it can be 2 data points that are missing. But yeah, it's a process.
Yeah, no, it can be a tough one. And because we talked a bit about the part of data analysis, and how you do you do it, right? You do the analysis before even going to the visualization. And I'd like to ask a little bit about what you both use for not both, because Shirley mentioned that then you have the coding part. So which tools you usually use for each step of the process when you're doing data visualization? So yeah, Shirley, if you'd like to start, then Nisa.
Oh, yeah. So actually, for this is gonna be, is it okay if I just show my book? I'm just gonna go grab it. But I'll be right back.
we can have Nisa and then Shirley while Shirley Rebecca. Okay, it was super quick.
Yeah, it's just on my coffee table, which is right by my desk. So the reason why I brought this over is because we actually, so this book I did with my friend Nadi Bremer, we actually get that question quite a bit of what we use for each step. So we actually have a whole section dedicated to the technology and tools that we use. So for the data, I use a lot of, for the data analysis, I use a lot of Observable Notebook with and recently they released Observable Plot, which is kind of a really quick charting library for exploration and analysis. And so that really lets me kind of, and Observable is kind of like a notebook where I can do a lot of data analysis and light exploration. And so that lets me kind of formulate some questions, then go in with plot and explore the data really quickly. And once I'm able to kind of, I really liked what Nisa, you said about kind of, seeing the skews in the data, the outliers, kind of how that data looks like. Then I go in with my my iPad and my Apple Pencil, and I'll start sketching out some ideas. And then finally in code, usually, it's, I do it for the web. So from web technologies, we use, I'm just reading through my book right now. This is like, I use a lot of SVG, Canvas, dabbled a little bit in WebGL, and then from JavaScript libraries, I use D3, which is kind of the big JavaScript library for data viz. And I use a lot of React and Vue for kind of managing all of the interactions and exploration. And I actually use a library called Greenstock Animation Platform for all of the, if I have more complicated animations. So yeah, that is what I use.
A lot of facts, I'd say. Different ones. And Nisa, in your case, what are your
in my case, a default Tableau in the beginning to explore data. For me, it's easy because you just drag and drop quite easily. You have the charts there. Even if you want to keep using Tableau for your visualization, it's something that you already have the charts that you may reutilize, and it's quite easy then to change the visual to do your visualization. But also React, JavaScript, if you want something more elaborate. So if you want to have much more interactions, if you want to do charts that are out of the box, then you go through the D3, JavaScript, and you will have React too. And then you have the scrolly tellings and all of that adds more eye candy also to the visualization.
Nice. And in terms of work distribution, usually, how much time do you use in each part of your work when you're doing for getting the data, preparing the data, analyzing, then visualizing, usually? Well,
to getting the data and work with the data and transform the data and all of that, it's like an iceberg. That is, I will say, 70% of your time. Making the visuals itself, telling the story, it doesn't take as much. I would say about 10-15% of that. And then is the final points, the points that you have to format to make all those pixels completely align like you want, to see the points of the storytelling, the text, how you are expressing, what is the value that you are taking. That also takes a little bit more. I would say the visuals itself, the charts, don't take as long as the preparation of data and then the refinement of the analysis.
Okay, and Sheila, for you, around the same, would you put?
It really depends on the project, and I can never really predict it. So, of course, for client projects, I've now kind of got it down to a when they give me the data, when they have the data themselves, I kind of think of both the data and design part as like one giant like a circle of a process where I just do both kind of at the same time. And so that's the part that takes the largest chunk of time for me, understanding the data set enough to be able to come up with a design that's compelling enough for communicating what we want with the data set. So I would say that that's the biggest chunk of time for me. And then the coding part, I think it really depends on the complexity of the design. Sometimes I'll like just have such a complex design that it might take me a while, but then or sometimes like the storytelling part will just like be one bug after the other and just take much longer than I expected. But usually the code part, and I think this is more speaking from a personal experience now. I think this is more just because of what I'm familiar with and what I'm not, because because I'm most comfortable in code. Usually the code part is the part that's the fastest for me. And then when it's personal projects, sometimes, oh boy, I agree with when you said like sometimes that data collection process, and that data cleaning process, it just takes a while. So I think it's like that whole like data part just takes, I swear it takes like 80% of the time. And once I have like a very clear direction, it's just very smooth from there.
So I think that the main thing with working with data, the problem is the data.
Yes. That's why I love when a client is like, oh, we have a data scientist. I'm like, sweet. Yes. Please just tell me what you want.
Please say that you have one.
Yeah.
I'm just sharing here because we received here a new version for the workflow.
Why is there like a, it almost looks like a person that's like.
It was from user that sent it in our chat. I think that we should share the new version, new workflow.
Thank you for sharing that, Yose.
No, the idea was to order the data. I mean, information design is about put everything in order and hierarchize, and you just draw like whatever. So I feel a little bit offended.
You're
about
right.
that.
Sorry. Yeah.
So
thank you for improving. Yeah.
Yes. Anytime.
I really
putting some hierarchy in the part of
yeah.
Yes, hierarchy, please, and order.
That's nice. That's good. That's good, and a good contribution. And it's well, I would say that it's a good sign that people are still awake in the audience. That's also nice. And well, we're kind of going to the end, and before the end, there is one thing that I'd like to bring in, especially because I think that it's also one of the beauty of the when we're working with data, because we can use data to bring awareness to topics. And I know that Nisa is working quite actively in this part with the Vis for Social Good initiative. So Nisa, if you could talk a little bit, because especially I don't think that it's super known in Brazil. I don't know, people from Brazil say yes or no in the chat, because I don't know if it's super known in Brazil, the initiative of data of a Vis for Social Good. So if you could just talk a little bit about how it works and how people can take part on it.
Yeah, let me share, because I will share the portal that we have. But can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So the Vis for Social Good is an initiative that started with volunteers. And it started with people that potentially, as many of you, were starting the journey in data visualization. So when we were starting that journey, we were collecting the stories And we're doing all these amazing visualizations, we were sharing, but then there was the so what? What are we doing with it? So Chloe at that time, Chloe Tseng, came with the idea of let's do something with the visualizations that we are creating, because we are creating so many beautiful visualizations and really things that are related with things that we want to raise awareness. Why aren't we doing something that we have a social impact? So the idea of Vis for Social Good was born. Everyone jumped at that opportunity. Because we're like, yes, of course, we want to participate in something where we are upskilling. At the same time, we are helping charities and NGOs. So the idea of data the Vis for Social Good is using the community of volunteers. It's not linked to a particular software. It's not linked to a particular vertical or health or education. So it encompasses everything. And create visualizations where we are helping these charities that have projects partner with the Vis for Social Good. And we create these visualizations in order for them to use it as or marketing or raising awareness, or even for them to check the data itself, the data points that they have. How does it work? For the charities itself, they can, as you can see, for the nonprofits, they can partner with us, they can apply. Then one of us of the board will get in contact, we'll see what is the need of that charity or nonprofits. They will share the data with us, and they will be very close to the project itself. For the volunteers, for someone that is starting visualization, or even the most experienced data visualizers, it's called, they can volunteer and create visualizations or stories with the data points and the information we have from the charities. We have a Slack channel. When you volunteer, you normally are onboarded on that Slack channel. When we have the projects, we'll have the team of that charity with us. They will be on the same Slack channel. So when they are there, you can make all the questions, you can ask all the questions you want about the data. At the same time, you can converse with other people in data visualization, even if it is to help on feedback or to learn a new technique, or you don't know to do something, you can have that part of upskilling too. In the end, normally they last about 6 weeks. By the end of the 6 weeks, the charity or the NGO will choose or shortlist about 10, sometimes it's 15, because they cannot decide, they are so good, they want all of them. And we have a call where our volunteers will present their visualizations to the team itself of that charity. The good thing, what does the NGO takes from it is output, so it's visualizations, it's also training. We try to upskill them in the tool that we are using. But for the volunteers is the opportunity of trying new tools if they wish, if it's the opportunity to gain new capabilities. But also we had people in the community that was between jobs and wanted to work with charities. This is an opportunity for them also to network. We had already several projects. We are since the 2016. So I will show you the projects that we have, and you will see that we work with the United Nations, UNICEF, Bridge for Prosperity. We had Kieran, Guys in St. Thomas, Sunny Street. For the United Nations, the volunteers that were shortlisted, they went, it was pre-COVID, they went there and did a presentation to all that community. So it's a good opportunity not only to create social impact, but also to upskill, to gain a new network, and potentially learn new verticals that you may want to dedicate your career in the future.
It's brilliant. I think that it's a very, very nice initiative. And I took part sometimes. I need to tell everyone it's nice. It's good. It's good to kind of, I don't know, to try some different data. I like to sometimes share a bit of the knowledge that we have in data with the organizations that need it. And usually they don't have data analysts, people to visualize and everything. So I think that it's an interesting thing to take part. And it's already.
Rachel, just to add a little bit. The other thing on that of upscaling is these projects, many of them don't have massive amounts of data. So it's also a good way, for me, are the most difficult projects, which is you just have 5 lines of data and trying to create a story of that. So it gives you that range of experience from copious amounts of data to almost no data at all.
Yeah.
So it's if you are learning data visualization, I'm biased, of course, but it will be a good opportunity.
No, I think that for sure. Yeah, and it's a good challenge to work with the different size of data set, and it's a different audience, because that in those cases we were doing something to generate impact and in a different way. I think it's a nice one. So thanks for sharing this, and I hope that people that are following, they kind of decide to take part in some of the future projects, because it's quite nice. And yeah, we're kind of over our times, but just before ending and saying thanks to everyone, I just would like very quickly for Shirley and Nisa, if you have, for instance, tips for people following, and then it can be or other people in the community that you find that are doing an amazing job, or websites. I don't know, Shirley, for instance, you show your publication in the Pudding, and I love them. I find them kind of amazing. I think that they're one of the best source. So it can be a website and a person, a Twitter account, a meetup that you follow. What do you would suggest to the people that are attending, things that you think that are kind of a very nice to follow in our area in data visualization? You can say your own tweeters. I'm not here to judge you. None of you. I follow you both, so it's okay.
Actually, from what you were saying about the pudding, I love what the pudding does in terms of like visual narratives and visual storytelling. They are so good at their craft. A group that I recently got to know because of Dataviz Society and the Outlier conference that they held, is a group called Continentalist, and with a K. And I kind of think okay, so I really don't like being like, they're like blah but I guess the most succinct way to describe them is they're like the pudding, where they also concentrate very much on culture and like cultural topics and pop culture, but they're based in Singapore, so a lot of the cultural themes and the data sets that they gather are much more based around kind of Asia and Southeast Asia. And that's something that I really love and am interested in. So I would love to recommend them. They have really great craftsmanship as well. And I think the thing that really stood out to me about them is they did an Outlier conference talk about how to tell cultural stories. And they are amazing going out and gathering data. Like, I think like when I think about data collection, a lot of it is still like sitting in front of the computer and like manually entering something in or like hitting some APIs. No, their data collection is like they went around to all of the temples in Singapore to look at, like, I think like for Chinese New Year or Lunar New Year, there's a tradition in Singapore apparently where they like have fortunes. Like each temple has their own fortune or something. So they went to each temple and gathered the fortunes, or like they like, you know, they actually go out into the field and gather the data. And I think that's super cool. So I would love to recommend them. I think otherwise, a lot of the people that I can think of are probably pretty well known in the community. So trying to think about.
I'm here in the page. I think that Carol also,
Yeah,
Carol,
thank you.
to share it. And yeah, it's amazing. I didn't know them. It's a quite nice one.
Right? Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. And Nisa, do you have any? Well, you shared already this for social good. That is a quite nice one. Do you have any second one to share?
Well, for inspiration, I have loads, but I will say you probably already know Frederica Fragapane, Georgia Lupi, Stephanie Prozavec. If you want to be inspired, I think information is a beautiful website. If you go through all the works and submissions that you have there, I personally like to go through National Geographic too. I love some of the visuals that they have, and even the La Nation, the journal. So those for me are normally the ones that I will see at least once or twice a week, just to see what people are doing. But yeah, the community that we have is so big. And of course, I love Shirley's work, Nadine's work too. You will be inspired. It's, I will just say, join a data visualization community. People normally are very welcoming. They will share also who are the people that inspire them. And yeah, get inspiration everywhere. I love, interior design magazines. I will look interior design and I will get inspiration from that. So inspiration is everywhere, I think.
I totally agree with that. I think a lot of inspiration comes to me from nature. So nature and art museums, those two. But actually, Nisa, you're mentioning about, that reminded me, I think I subscribe to Flowing Data. And he has a feed where I think every day or every few days, he'll just like send a short email with like the most recent visualizations that he's found. So that helps me kind of like stay, I guess, not the word isn't relevant, but up to date. Yes, up to date with like kind of what's going on. And then another one that if you're interested in, if you're like, I mean, I think like Viz for Social Good has like probably amazing data sets, but if you want another source for data sets, there is another newsletter that every few days or every week or so sends out links to publicly available data sets. And the name for that publication is blanking on me right now. If anyone can remember. Oh,
I know which one you mean. I know.
Oh gosh. I'm trying to, sorry, hold on. It's in my email. So if I just scroll back, it's called Data is Plural. So data is plural.
Okay.
And that's like another newsletter you can subscribe to.
Thanks a lot, Shirley and Nisa, for the resource, for the chat, for sharing the frustrations, sharing the tools that you use, sharing the stories and the work you do. I think that for everyone, you both are super inspirational. So I'd like to thank you both a lot.